and welcome to the third day of the 8th Symposium on Energy Transition organized by the Hellenic Association for Energy Economic. We are very honored and I'm very privileged to introduce you to our next panel, the first panel for today, which is titled Europe in Energy Transition, a Common Challenge. And we have with us two distinguished guests, the ambassadors of Britain in Greece, Mr. Matthew Lodge, and the Dutch ambassador in Greece, Ms. Susanna Terstal. Please join me for the discussion. So, ambassadors, thank you very much for being here with us. And allow me to have just one question in the beginning, a common question for both of you, and then we can have some personal questions. So, Greece's energy sector has been transformed. So, our national energy climate plan has been updated and trying to incorporate all the new, developments that happen day after day. The energy transition is happening very fast. We wish that it would happen very fast anyway, trying to adapt. So we incorporate measures, policies, and in order to develop and support the climate goals that have been set either by our government or the European governments, and in the same time maintain energy security, which is a very crucial aspect. How can our countries, either under the European, Union or bilaterally, collaborate and cooperate to speed up the green energy transition, and in such a complex geopolitical situations that we live every day, and it's like a living environment changing, and it's very difficult for either specific governments or the global European policy to make and set a path for the future. So
Is it on? Yeah, it's
yes.
on. Well, thank you first of all for hosting this symposium, and it's a pleasure to be here. In the Netherlands, our circumstances are different than they are in Greece. Our goal of a net zero energy system is the same. A lot of the challenges we face and the opportunities we encounter overlap. Let me give some examples. First, the energy transition will help us to be more independent. At the same time, much of the technology and crucial materials that are required come from outside Europe. Second, renewable energy resources are now mostly cheaper than fossil alternatives. In order to be effective, we need large investments in electricity grids. We will have to maintain grid stability with all these new energy sources. And third, physical space is scarce. For example, the North Sea that we share already serves as fishing ground. It is a busy shipping route and it's a highway for birds. On top of that, we use it as an energy facility. Our success depends on how we balance these different issues. In the Netherlands, we try to work on those issues, and there's lots of room for cooperation with other countries, like Greece. Let me make it concrete. Investing in renewables work, but good coordination is essential. Those of you who ever went to the Netherlands know that we have lots of wind. We capitalize on that abundance by investing in offshore wind. We are open to sharing our experience, and I've been to your islands. There is a lot of wind as well. Secondly, we cannot afford to go through the energy transition alone. We are investing in new grid connections, such as with the UK. It will help distribute the renewable energy of offshore wind parks and strengthen net stability. Greece can play a similar regional role in the Mediterranean. Lastly, since the discovery of gas in the north of the Netherlands in the 60s, we built our economy around gas. In order to repurpose this existing infrastructure for hydrogen, large scale electrolyzers are built. We are already signing MOUs with future suppliers. So in short, what we have to do is work with what we have, share our experiences, and be creative.
Thank you.
Spiro, thank you. And for my part, delighted to be here back with you this year, and very pleased to be sat alongside Susanna. And let me just endorse everything that she said. I think let me just list 4 things where I think we can cooperate. And in some ways, the answer is in your question, because I think the first and overriding message for all of us, whatever political institutions we are part of, or used to be part of, or whatever geographical region that we're in, is that there has to be an approach of collective action, which has to take place at a global level, at a regional level, at a national level, and indeed a local level. And without that, we're not going to tackle this challenge. Secondly, is I think the point that energy security, which we've been talking about a lot over the last 18 months, and we'll come back to, I think, this morning, and action on climate needs to go hand in hand. It's clearly no good just trying to address the green transition without being mindful of the geopolitical risks and challenges of our energy security needs. And we can't just lean into guaranteeing our energy security and weaning ourselves off Russian oil and gas, for example, if we're not thinking about the climate impact of how we do that. The answer, as the experts will remind us, both for security reasons, but for just common sense in terms of consistency and supply, has to be a mix of clean technologies. And as Susanna says, those of us who are bordering the North Sea are fortunate to have a steady supply of wind. Our photovoltaic delivery is not quite the same, perhaps, as here in the Mediterranean and so on. But they're all, those are slightly glib answers, but there's an illustration there about why the mix matters. And I think the question then is, if we recognize those first 3 points, how do we do it? And there's clearly a very political point about leadership. And then again, I come back to your opening question. The UK is fortunate to be a member of the G7, a member of the G20. The Netherlands takes part in G20 meetings. Greece does not, but that mustn't become a barrier. We must be leading and working together to apportion, if you like, the challenge between us. And the power of example, which I suspect we'll come back to, but the power of example is also an important issue. So that cooperation, the openness that goes with it and makes it sustainable and feasible is really important. As we see from the COP framework, and we were privileged to chair COP26 in Glasgow nearly 2 years ago now, getting the right legal framework and regulatory framework is important, not only at an international political level, but also for industry, for investors and businesses. And we need to think about effective communications. And this is very topical in the United Kingdom at the moment, where as we are somewhere between 6 and 12 months away from a general election, this is rapidly becoming a rather political topic. So our communications and how we support those communications with clear evidence-based policy making is another really important part. And I think for the United Kingdom, for Greece, for the Netherlands, we've all got a part to play in that.
Thank you, Matthew. What really makes me happy is that eventually we will not need to discover the wheel. It's like the technologies for energy transition and the pathway and the recipe is known. I think it's more or less the same especially for the European, developed countries. So it's not like we need to do something strange or something that really. I think it's a matter of political will and a matter of coordination, more or less. And the general this recipe definitely includes intercorrections, meaning that we need to collaborate, invest in renewables and many other things that can be really it's a palette. It's a palette with not so many options, and per country you just need to make the special selection that is really necessary or suitable for each one of us. Because it's different talking about Greece or maybe different talking about Netherlands. We have different characteristics, but overall it's the same pathway for all of us. So for specifically for both UK and Netherlands. Which are countries in the forefront of the energy transition for many years, and in the European Union, and which extent the recent energy crisis will affect your national energy and climate, plans, which is very interesting. Now talking more or less last year, so we're only talking about energy. Now we really put climate, and it's like a straight, pointing out that climate is really imposing our energy decisions, which is nice. So, in other ways, what are the challenges that both your countries will face in order to step up and speed up the energy transition measure? So, Matthew, now it's your turn to start.
Thank you. Well, I alluded to this in my first response, particularly over the last 2 weeks. We've seen a lively and at times really quite difficult domestic debate in the United Kingdom. And why do I want to raise that particularly? Because I think the point that you've just said, Spiro, and we've talked about, we all accept we are fortunate in the United Kingdom, and I'll come back to this. We're fortunate that because of chairing COP26, because of the availability of established technology for wind power, offshore, onshore, because of our broader geostrategic position, that actually the public debate and recognition of the urgency of the climate challenge and the need to tackle the green transition is quite well advanced. And former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was particularly vocal on this and had people like Lord Goldsmith working with him and so on. But again, as I said a moment ago, we need to be honest. The energy crisis for our citizens, for those who elect our political masters, has presented very real difficulties and continues to do so in terms of things that impact citizens where they notice it most. The cost of living, their ability to put fuel in their tank to heat their homes, etc. So what we've seen over the last 10 days, 2 weeks in the UK, has been Prime Minister Sunak announce a series of measures that are designed to show that his government is listening to the concerns of ordinary citizens and designed to reassure those ordinary citizens that green transition is not just something for government, it's not just something for big business which offers opportunities for investment. We need to do it because we need to sustain the planet that we're living on. But it cannot and must not be done at a pace or in a way that actually makes it unsustainably difficult for our citizens over the coming 6, 12, 18 months or whatever else. So there's a series of measures that have been approached under the banner of trying to achieve a more pragmatic approach to attaining net zero. That is deeply controversial and has prompted some very strong criticism. Now, my job here is to represent the government, but also to contribute constructively to the debate here. I think our ministers recognise that. But my response would be to say, as I did at the beginning, we are only going to be able to achieve this transition if we bring our populations with us. And that's true whether we're politicians or whether we're officials or whether we're experts or whatever. So that is behind it. And I think a lot of it is also about creating the space to push ahead as hard and as fast as you can when you can, but also being able to adapt and adjust. And we are fortunate in the UK that decisions taken by previous governments mean that actually within a immediate European context, we've managed to reduce carbon emissions by nearly 50%, which is actually more than any other major economy. We've got binding targets for 2035. And whilst we're not complacent, and it would be wrong and irresponsible to sort of sell short-term reassurance to the electorate on the back of, oh, we've done it, because we haven't, there is, I think, this balance to be struck. And that's where we are at the moment. So it is politically very sensitive. It's practically very difficult. But we are clear and determined that it is not going to derail us from the ultimate objective that we all share of attaining net zero and trying to get as close to 1.5 degrees so that we can protect our planet. But challenge that by all means, but that's where we are.
What is interesting is what you also said in your question. We all come from very different places and we want to reach the same goal. And our histories are different. What I mentioned in reply to your first question is that in the Netherlands, we found gas in the 60s. And it brought us a lot of wealth. It also brought us the Dutch disease. And it gave a lot of problems to the citizens who live in the area where that gas was found. And especially that last point is important for what I want to say. There were a lot of earthquakes, people's houses were destroyed, there was a lot of popular uprising in a sense. So the government had decided already to stop or to lower the level of gas that we were taking from this part of the country, Groningen. Difficult to pronounce for almost everybody. But before that, all Dutch households, we cook on gas, we have our electricity, a part of it from gas, so gas is everywhere. Now, the Russian invasion in Ukraine, energy prices going up. It's even clearer that we have to get off gas. And Dutch citizens understand that because of the whole drama that we had in Groningen. So at the start of the war, when the energy prices went up, we had a lot of compensation schemes for consumer and businesses. We did decide to be less strict on coal-fired power plants, and we increased LNG. But we realized we have to get closer to net zero energy systems. So this change must come from structural measures. Increased goal for wind at sea should be doubled by 2030. And for 2050, we are now aiming at 70 gigawatts of capacity. We have set ambitious goals for solar photovoltaic. We don't have as much sun as you do, but enough to run. We are having subsidy schemes for households for energy-saving technologies, such as heat pumps and insulation. We really have to get off gas. New houses won't have gas installations anymore, and older houses, they can transform. And electric mobility, and this is something I'm really proud of, 1 of 3 charging points for electric cars in Europe is in the Netherlands. Greece has some ways to go, but electric cars, I see them more and more. We discussed it. We both drive electrical cars. But also here, the EU plays a role, and I saw that the objective is to have a charging point in Europe every 60 kilometers by 2030. Something else is the electricity grid. And here, again, we can share experiences. We have now 6,000 companies on a waiting list for new or higher capacity connection. We need 100 billion euros to adapt the Dutch grid for the transition. And even if we have the money, we need skilled workers. And we all know that that is problematic at the moment. So again, what you said as well, you need not only the will, but you need good policy coordination. We need learning from each other. And we have to realize that action in the energy sector also needs action outside that sector.
Thank you both. I just catch a couple of words that both of you mentioned. Matthew mentioned about G20 and the participation of UK and also as an observer, the Netherlands. You know what? The G20 are paying 1.4 trillion for subsidies for fossil fuels, 200 something for renewables. That's the current status, and this is the 2021 values. So subsidizing fossil fuels even today with a huge amount of money. Of course, most of European countries are doing it because of the energy crisis, because of the high prices. This is the butter in the fossil fuel industry bread, meaning that we pay for the customers, but more or less we are paying to keep the energy prices high, extremely high. While on the other hand, the prices that we could get from Europe is very cheap. So this is a big dilemma that we are having in Europe. How can we really speed up the energy transition, and on the other hand, paying for this energy high energy prices, which is, in my point of view, it's a matter of policy and something that we really need to understand before making all these stepping forward actions. And to come back for EVs is in Greece. Yes, we know we have a very ambitious deputy minister who has really planned on the whole scheme of electromobility in Greece. And for instance, the Hellenic Association for Energy Economics was organizing e-mobility conferences like 6 or 7 years ago, and at that time everybody was joking with us, saying, "Come on, what are you doing? This is science fiction." And now this is a must. But yes, I'm positive for mobility in Greece because it's something that really our government is pushing forward. Of course, we have a lot of obstacles, bottlenecks, like technical obstacles, not a matter of policy will, and it's going to take time. It's gonna take time, but eventually, I think we will step up. I don't know if it's gonna become like Netherlands, which is impressive. One out of three chargers being in such a small country, which is everybody should have electric vehicles. Maybe you'll be the first one in Europe. Uh, but also, UK is really developed, and I know I'm being there every year many times, and I can see the will that they have to step forward, even if UK is outside Europe now. I don't know if it's going to be good or bad eventually, but I think that this allows UK to really move independently of our Europe, which is, as yesterday mentioned, a big ship that moves very slowly towards the, I don't know, the destruction anyway, but we have to check on that. So we are talking about so many technologies that really are part of the energy transition I've mentioned here: offshore wind, hydrogen, e-mobility, energy storage, and other. And in both your countries, all these technologies have really been, at least compared to the rest of European countries, quite forwarded and developed. What's your opinion is the key, and which should be the proposed actions for Greece to mature these technologies as fast as possible? So we need your advice here, and maybe your, I don't know, maybe your small recipe. How should we do it very fast?
Let me first say something about fossil subsidies. This is a debate in the Netherlands that's raging at the moment. Extinction Rebellion is occupying a very crucial part of a highway every day. So every day this is in the newspapers, and people get very annoyed with Extinction Rebellion, but the topic is on the table and it is being discussed. So even there, I think we're making headway. But on your question, what can we do? What can Greece do? And how can we cooperate? Most of it has been said already, I think. An important thing is the policy coordination, having a clear policy. The Greek legal framework has been updated, is there. For the Netherlands, of course, our cooperation in offshore wind. It's a long trajectory. If we start planning now, we might have good energy from windmills maybe in 10 years. So it's crucial to begin with the planning as quickly as possible. Do it accurate, but do it fast. There are many Dutch companies that are enthusiastic about working in Greece. I talked to a company that is specialized in deep sea offshore wind parks, which with the waters you have could be extremely useful. we have to really learn from our best practices and work in this area. We had our first experiences in building offshore capacity in the North Sea, and I think there really is a possibility for cooperation there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Spiro. Let me a bit like Susanna did, start with a sort of 60-second political observation on your point about the G20 and others. This is not great sort of academic thought, but it's certainly my personal reflection. As leading developed liberal democracies, we, depending on your perspective, but we have shown how the impetus and drive from our voters, coupled with the capability that we have in our developed societies, in advanced technology and so on, has meant that we have been able to lead the way. And we are doing that, and we've talked already about the importance of leadership. There's also a debate which isn't aired very much here in Europe or in the developed world about from the middle-income developing countries about, well, hang on, it's all very well you to say you need to speed up the green transition, but we're still in the process of large-scale poverty reduction, developing our economies and infrastructures. So I don't think we should be shy about an international debate where we are in many ways leading. And I think there is an opportunity as well as a responsibility for us to do that and to show what can be done. And in many ways, far from perfect, but in many ways, that's exactly what we're doing. The UK's experience has been that it is this collective effort that's required, that there needs to be a strategy and a plan. And I think in that regard, the National Energy and Climate Plan that the Greek government is due to publish shortly is very much a step in the right direction. And then my experience talking to British companies, but also experts in the field and so on, is that having we talked about it earlier, having a regulatory framework that is understood and predictable, that actively allows the private sector, because we can't do this again with just government state funding, the private sector to map out its ambition and to deliver on it at a pace that it needs to for its own shareholders and so on, but which allows government also through incentivization, through financial support schemes, whatever, to push the pace and to an extent steer the direction. That is enormously complex. And in the UK, we've got various plans and various initiatives, and we're continuing to sort of resolve those, whether it's about creating a more beneficial tax environment, about calibrating how that regulatory framework steers the investment that is there. And so I don't think it's for others to prescribe to Greece exactly what it needs to do, but there's a huge amount of best practice, and within that best practice, some lessons that we've got wrong that others can learn from. But ultimately, it does come back to collaboration. And I'm really struck over the last 18 months that those of us around the North Sea and in Northern Europe who've been in the renewable space for quite a long time have been able to pull together politically. And again, it's nothing to do whether we're a member of the European Union or not, or whether Norway is an EFTA country or whatever. But and it feels quite regional. And I think that the messaging coming out of the Greek government, previous one, re-elected one now, about Greece's ambitions as an energy hub and partnership with Israel, with Cyprus, with Egypt, linking in with the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, all of there's a huge opportunity. And it's why our core business as diplomats in terms of regional security and stability for Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean is even more important than ever. Because if this region, and if Greece is going to be able to realize the benefits and meet the needs, then you need first and foremost a degree of regional security and trust.
Thank you, Matthew. Yesterday we had the CEO of IPTO, and this discussion about, the central role that Greece can play in as an energy hub, and not necessarily as an energy hub for fossil fuels, because we've been talking a lot about also pipelines that could cross our country, and there are several ones already, and We're talking about FSIUs in Alexandroupoli, which allow Greece to export, more or less being a hub that will export gas for other countries. And we should not demonize fossil fuels. Last year, if we didn't have Revithousa, Bulgaria, for example, would really collapse. The energy system of Bulgaria would have collapsed. So it's not the idea, but we need to be realistic and understand where we are and where we need to be in the future. And of course, Greece being an energy hub for renewables, like a pathway for energy coming. Yesterday we discussed about, and this is the first maybe that will be realized, the interconnection between Israel, Cyprus, and then Greece. The second one, maybe in terms of time frame, will be the interconnection with Egypt. But yesterday we also heard about the interconnection path and a scheme that was discussed the day before. So it's very, very recent from United Emirates. It's been like so far away, energy coming from that, renewable energy coming so far away from, and through Greece can go upwards towards the central European countries. And of course, we can talk about different interconnection, hoping that, maybe we were discussing it yesterday, 10 years ago in our conference, we were really discussing about lines on the European map, and all these lines were pipelines. Now we're making the discussion about these lines that they are electricity interconnections, and it's really it's a change. It's a modification in the way that we are planning, and I know this discussion is a huge discussion also for the northern countries. It's an energy ally that's being now formed, and it's very interesting that we incorporate countries that otherwise we wouldn't think, like it's UK, which is okay, it's an ally country anyway to Europe, and also Norway, and all these countries really, we get allies in order to bring energy to the center European countries like Germany and other regions. So interconnection is a way of really connecting all our countries, and it's something that is very crucial. One thing I wanted to ask you about is the public opposition. It's something which is quite strange, because I can talk about Greece. People don't like fossil fuels, more or less. People also don't like, wind parks because they're ugly, because, some people make money out of them. They don't like photovoltaics. Okay, don't have so much geothermal. So it's, the NIMBYs. It's very typical term. And what's the status in your countries? That's something I wanted to ask.
It's a good question, and I don't think it was in the Prime Minister's latest announcements, but there has been, and there is still, an ongoing debate with government at national and local level about planning authority for whether it's onshore wind is particularly controversial. Offshore, I think there's a wide acceptance of that, although even there are constituencies, the fishing community or others, who are often a bit resistant. Look, this comes back to the point about evidence-based policy making, open and honest debate with societies about the balances and trade-offs, and trying to find an agreed way forward. I was scribbling, we haven't talked about it and perhaps haven't got time, but again, the other thing, there was an announcement earlier this week that the government has supported a regulator's assessment for drilling in a new field off the west of the Shetland Islands, the Rosebank field. And again, that's been hugely controversial. And the balance that's at play there, and I think we just need to be honest about that balance, includes, as I was, before we sat down, we're driven by the energy security point we've talked about. There is a real world sort of urgency about available and accessible sources of energy now. So it's all very well saying we can deliver a 10-year investment, but our societies need it, our economies need it now. There's a question of economic viability for whatever project or scheme you're using. And that's, if you like, on one side of the balance sheet. On the other side, there's a question about, well, the pace of change, because we have accepted that the green transition is essential. And we want to contribute to that and not increase our carbon emissions and deliver on our commitment to net zero reductions and so on. But these things are not straightforward and they're not completely binary. So we do need to be honest about the balance that is there. And that plays out in planning decisions. Some people, I still haven't made up my mind. some people actually say that a mass of sort of wind turbines has a beauty of its own, and you can cast your mind back 150 years or a bit more, 19th century Britain and the Industrial Revolution and so on, and people, you know, we can adapt to these things. I think the point is only by taking a national and regional approach can you address these concerns and say, well, look, this is an area that is Natura or protected site of special scientific interest or whatever else. It's not appropriate there. How can we find intelligent, proportionate ways of still delivering on the green transition whilst addressing the legitimate concerns around aesthetics and the physical environment? And that needs a conversation.
Susanna.
Here again, countries are really different in where they come from. The public mood in the Netherlands is really changing. Gas was cheap, everywhere available. People didn't think about the problems it caused. The moment we had those major earthquakes in Groningen, you saw changes. It is about pricing. If we can get the pricing right, people don't mind where their electricity comes from, as long as it's payable. Offshore wind parks, in the beginning, there was some protest, but not a lot. You cannot drive for a longer distance in the Netherlands without seeing wind parks, so people are fine with it. The mood really is against fossil fuels. And if you look at the location of the Netherlands, we get the bad winds from everywhere, the bad water from everywhere. So there is this sense that what the neighbors are doing matters, what we are doing matters for our environment. Our government, we are in a very interesting political situation in the Netherlands at the moment. The government fell just before the summer. The issue is was migration, something the Greeks can understand. But the debate is very much open. Climate is a topic. Energy is a topic. We have new coalitions that are forming. Climate is a topic both ways. Some might have heard about this farmers' party in the Netherlands. It's about the nitrogen debate. But climate and energy and the different solutions are very much on the table. In the last few years, we saw some of the big industries leaving the Netherlands, like Shell is now more British than Dutch. There has not been a lot of public opposition against that. And the public in the end approved that we take those measures, that companies are leaving the Netherlands now.
I remember it was like, I think it was 15 years ago, maybe more, when I visited Netherlands, and it was like I got some pictures of huge wind turbines in agricultural areas, and I got it back to our students and saying, like, people, that's what's happening in Europe. So don't talk about aesthetics in the wind industry. But okay, it's a personal opinion all the times, but. We have to decide. I have a picture also in Greece that it's on the one side it's like a wind park, and everybody says, "Come on, they're ugly." And behind the guy that takes the photograph, it's a huge oil burning facility with huge chimneys, and no one sees that. This is very strange, for me. But okay, last thing is the investments, and now we have really painted them. It's like green investments in everywhere in the world, everywhere in Europe. We have the taxonomy. We have more or less a system in Europe that really prioritizes or maybe forbids investments in the bad technologies, meaning fossil fuels or whatever. So what are the developments in your countries in terms of green investments and the anticipated pathway in the future in order to subsidize or monetize and speed up the investments in renewables, more or less, or the other technologies that are necessary, like mostly investments in the grids and storage, which are the two crucial elements in order to speed up the energy transition. Susanna.
Yeah. Well, of course, the energy transition is already taking place, and the market moves faster than the government. Production of wind has increased. We will hit our targets for 2030 earlier. Electric mobility is an interesting one. We are doing really well there. But at the same time, if you think about electric cars, the lithium has to come from somewhere. We have lithium in Europe, but we don't want to mine it because it's so polluting. So electric mobility based on batteries is an intermediary phase, and we are really looking to hydrogen. The first electrolyzers are planned, and we will see the first steps in retrofitting our infrastructure. We see a shift from power production to energy storage and demand side management. Well, these are just some examples. There are lots of opportunities. And also, I think in hydrogen, it's interesting what you said about the situation of Greece. When you are in Brussels or in the Netherlands, Greece looks really far away. I worked in the Middle East previously, and Greece is the first country of the European Union. So it's all a question of perspective. And I think this really gives a lot of opportunities in Greece that you are grabbing already in your cooperation in the region, like we are doing in our region. And the UK is very much part of Europe, even though not in the Union. But I really believe these regional cooperations are part of our future.
Matthew.
Spiro, thank you. Just to pick up, Susanna referenced Shell now being probably more British than Dutch, but also to try and link some of the things we've been talking about with new technologies and how we're developing those. I'm not here to defend the oil and gas industry, but it is quite interesting in the UK where they are very much part of the debate. And they're now, the plan is, we've got what we call a North Sea transition deal, that in the way of these things is, there's some big numbers attached to it, but it's designed to attract investment, generate employment, help reduce emissions, but essentially is seeking to harness the role of the mature oil and gas companies in delivering carbon capture, utilization and storage enabled hydrogen. And there's a deal which commits the industry to deliver investment of between 14 and 16 billion pounds sterling, so nearly 20 billion euro by 2030, in new energy technologies, including electrolytic and carbon capture, utilization and storage enabled hydrogen production capacity. So I think that's interesting in itself. We've also got, just to illustrate some of the areas, because this is a dynamic and fast moving environment, we've got a number of programs that are particularly sort of prominent at the moment. Another one, carbon capture and storage project in the Viking area of the North Sea. This is part of this deal I was talking about by BP and Harbour Energy. It's estimated that this Viking carbon capture storage program has the potential to meet 1/3 of the UK government's target to capture and store up to 30 million tons of CO2 by 2030. And it's expected to unlock up to £7 billion of investment across the full CO2 capture, transport and storage value chain by 2025, 2035. So that's a huge area in a new one, but involving some old actors. In the newer space, offshore wind, there's a Hornsea development plan park for no fewer than 231 wind turbines, generating at least 2.85 gigawatts of green electricity. That's being done. The developer is Ørsted, headquartered in Denmark, but with offices in London. And then thirdly, on the storage one, and particularly in the sort of the battery technology, which is a big debate, we recently had an announcement from Tata, of course, not a European company at all, but with their own interests in Jaguar Land Rover and so on, to build a 40 gigawatt battery cell gigafactory in the UK. That's over a £4 billion investment. So those are just, and there are plenty of other examples. But those are three illustrations of areas where they're happening here and now is big investment, new technologies, some of it still quite uncertain. I would come back to the point that Susanna's made, and we've talked about already, though. Nationally and at a European level, we need to be developing our grid infrastructure more, because it's all very well creating this new technology, but it's all got to link together. That's another point I should have mentioned in the Greek context, but yeah.
It's the only way that we can really diversify the way that we produce electricity and send it to customers, because potential customers are everywhere in Europe, and they're really striving for green electricity, which is very, very important. So we have time for one question maybe from the audience. Kostas.
Thank you very much for the excellent conversation and discussion. Both the United Kingdom and the Netherlands have been leaders in showing the way and paving the way for Europe for the energy transition. As correctly said, even more than 15 years ago. And we see that it's a long and bumpy ride from what we also understood over the past 2 days over the discussions we had in the conference. And countries like Greece or other European countries are a little bit lagging behind on this energy transition. The Commission now is pushing forward towards that. Where do you think that your country stands? And it's a question for both of you in terms of finding the end in this green energy transition at the end of the day. Do you think we're decades away, or is it something that is coming faster in both countries?
I kick off. I mean, two things, and I'm not just saying it because I'm sat here in Athens, but I don't think anybody who has lived in Greece this summer could say with the fires and the floods that we've got decades. We haven't got decades, and that is clear. And in the UK, we've, touch wood, been relatively lucky so far, but we are seeing increasingly evident impacts of the climate emergency affecting all of us. So we haven't got decades. You're absolutely right. It has been a bumpy ride. And I think our own experience, I can't speak for others, is that often that ride, that journey is not purely linear, because politics and other things get in the way. But that doesn't mean that we're not able to make progress and to build on that incrementally. I asked the team just to remind me where we were in terms of UK energy production generated from renewable sources. It was over 41% of our energy consumption last year was generated from renewable sources. That was something that even 10 years ago people weren't thinking about. So we're making progress, and we need to just keep going. And it's like any difficult, strategic, complex challenge. Yes, it will be bumpy and there will be setbacks, but you need to have the goal and you need to be determined in your pursuit of it. And I think we are, but we need to do it together.
Yeah, you take the words out of my mouth. The Netherlands is part of the European Union, so the debate is also very much in the European Union. The Green Deal has been on the table with the present Commission. I'm sure it will continue under the new Commission. What I find interesting in that, of course, politics, they have to listen to everybody, they listen to the public, but the market is moving faster because we see it is necessary. And I actually see that also the public, what I was referring to in the earlier question about protest, the public is moving very, very fast. Tata Steel, we have a big Tata Steel factory in the Netherlands. It's all over the newspapers now. There are protests because it turns out that the people who live near Tata Steel They have all kinds of medical problems. So the public sees that we have to change. I think politics is forced to keep up with the public and the markets, and that we should take our role and make sure we have the right coordination and invest in the right infrastructure. And grid is a big one also here. Maybe one other thing. What we see in the Netherlands, our energy mix is very important also for industry. So it's not only households, it's very much industry as well. And how can you cater to the needs of the big industries? How can you get them greener? I think Greece is in a better position there because for you, electricity, it's almost only households.
Thank you. All it's a discussion that could go on for hours, but thank you for a lively discussion. Thank you for expressing your opinions and showing what's happening in your countries, which are very interesting. And maybe we can get examples from how we can really speed up the way that we are dealing with the energy transition. Maybe get a better way of collaborating bilaterally and also in terms of our European common energy future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.